Now we move to First Minister's questions. Question number 1, Joanne Lamont.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what engagements is planned for the rest of the day.
First Minister.
Engagements to take forward the Government's programme for Scotland.
Joanne Lamont. Thank you.
Why is the Scottish Government cutting help for victims of the bedroom tax by £20 million next year?
First Minister.
I should congratulate Joanne Lamont first. I think, if my memory serves me correctly, this is the first time she's mentioned the words bedroom tax and raised the First Minister's questions. So now the Labour Party feels itself to be in a position to address an issue at First Minister's questions, which has been a huge issue affecting people in Scotland over a matter of months. We should congratulate Joanne Lamont at last for raising it. The Scottish Government, as Joanne Lamont well knows, have put forward the substantial increase in discretionary housing payments, 1.5 times what was being offered by the Westminster Government, in order to address and allow our local authorities to address some of the worst aspects of the bedroom tax. That effective action has been welcomed by a wide range of organisations who care about the people of Scotland and who talk about the bedroom tax all of the time.
Joanne Lamont.
Yes, of course, but the problem with the First Minister is he talks about it all of the time. He doesn't act in the interests of ordinary people. You know, if people were to be comforted by promises in the future, then we'd be in a very strange place. It is what you can do now that actually matters. 20 million this year, nothing next year, and this year half of what was expected by the very organisations he mentioned. But of course, the real reason that the Scottish Government is cutting off support for the victims of the bedroom tax is that they see injustice as an opportunity not to help people suffering in Scotland, but an opportunity to be exploited ahead of the referendum. If the First Minister really wanted rid of the bedroom tax, he would be urging voters in England in 2015 to vote Labour to abolish it. Rather than asking them to vote for Nick Clegg, as he did in 2010. The memory banks have been wiped, but the evidence of the First Minister's poor judgment seen there again. Now, we know that the First Minister doesn't agree with John Swinney on renationalising postal services or pensions or the public finances. But does he agree with his Finance Secretary when he said the reason this government won't help victims of the bedroom tax is that, and I quote, they don't want to let Westminster off the hook?
First Minister.
Right. Well, of course,
First Minister.
The Finance Secretary, John Swinney, has helped victims of the bedroom tax. And can we quote the people who talk about the bedroom tax all of the time? Shelter Scotland, Graham Brown, we're delighted the Scottish Government had listened to Shelter Scotland's campaign and are making £20 million available to help thousands more households affected by the so-called bedroom tax. Children in Need Chief Executive Jackie Brock. While Scotland does not have the power to change the policy, we are pleased to see the Scottish Government utilising the powers they do have to help mitigate the impact of our most vulnerable households. So let's not have from Joanne Lamont that John Swinney hasn't helped people afflicted by the bedroom tax. That's the effective action that the SNP Government have taken. But when portraying in Joanne Lamont's question was something even more interesting. Joanne Lamont says that the thing we must do in order not to have the bedroom tax imposed upon the people of Scotland is to make an appeal to people in England not to vote Labour. That is the sum total. The sum total of the Labour Party's ambition for the people of Scotland. Many people in Scotland, this party, other parties, many people throughout Scotland, is the way to stop iniquities such as the bedroom tax being imposed on the Scottish people, is to take the power over social security so that we can build the society we want to have.
Joanne Lamont.
John Swinney's given them less than half that people asked for this year. He's giving them nothing next year. And the reason he's giving them nothing next year because this is another justification for separation rather than a policy that should be tackled. The First Minister is fond of saying that the best people to make decisions about Scotland are the people who live here, who care most about Scotland. He has the power to help victims of the bedroom tax now. He has the power, and with £179 million underspent last year, he has the funds. Isn't it the case that the First Minister might live in Scotland, but he has decided not to act because he does not care about the victims of the bedroom tax and he would rather exploit their pain?
First Minister.
Yes, well, of course, the 28 million is the limit that we have under our powers at the present moment, which is exactly what Shelter asked for. But let's return to this question of where these matters should be governed and settled in Scotland. Presumably, Joanne Lamont, even Joanne Lamont and the Labour Party don't believe that the Scottish Government can find resources to cope with all of the welfare change that are being imposed upon the Scottish people. Presumably they accept, in conjunction with our colleagues in COSLA, we've done what we can on council tax benefit. Presumably she understands the reinforcement of Scotland's charities in terms of their ability to help people in extremity has been an important move to make. And presumably she does concede that it was Shelter who asked for £20 million because they realised that was the legal limit which we could have under the powers of this Parliament. So if it's accepted, and it's accepted by many people, including these charities, that we are doing everything we can within the powers we have to try and mitigate the effect of Westminster-imposed cutbacks on the Scottish people, then surely the solution is obvious. If we want not to have the bedroom tax, if we want not to have people with disability subjected to humiliation, then why can't we in this country have the power to frame our own welfare system so that it meets the ambitions of the Scottish people?
Joanne Lamont.
You know, if the First Minister was interested in his day job, he would know that there's not a £20 million limit on what he can spend. But even if that were true, it does not explain why he's not putting any money into next year's budget when there is nothing there. Because perhaps another reason why the government isn't helping is because instead of having civil servants try to improve the lives of Scots, finding ways of supporting people, he has got them away writing fantasy plans for a Scottish Air Force, embassies and our own secret service. Well, while the First Minister has been doing that between trips to the Ryder Cup and Wimbledon, and I would advise him not to go to Wimbledon and behave the way he did this year. However, we have been working. Here is a bill which can protect Scotland from the bedroom tax. It has been lodged with the Parliament today. It has support from the very organisations that the First Minister has just cited. So instead of cutting help for victims of the bedroom tax, will the First Minister pledge to sign this bill now and do the right thing by Scotland rather than the right thing by the SNP?
First Minister.
It's now 6 months since SNP councils across the country moved the no evictions policy. That didn't read then with unanimous support. Aberdeen Council, the 25th of March 2013, Labour-led with the Tories in alliance, rejected the motion calling for no evictions. In Falkirk, the Labour-Tory alliance on the 13th of February rejected the SNP motion. The Labour Party refused this spring to endorse the no evictions policy which was being carried out by SNP councils across Scotland, and we all know that Labour-run North Lanarkshire tried to evict a disabled single mum until the Daily Record exposed them on the 22nd of August, while only after Council Leader Jim McCaig was confronted by Ms Fraser and the Daily Record was the eviction threat withdrawn. So if the concern of the Labour Party was for people across Scotland under the heel of the bedroom tax, then why did they not support the SNP policy in terms of a no evictions policy across Scotland? But then, of course, Joanne Lamont has a track record these days in waiting to raise against the bedroom tax until it was said at the Labour conference that finally the Labour Party were prepared to argue for a repeal of the bedroom tax. For 6 months we have been waiting with different interpretations from different Labour figures in Scotland because they've been waiting for Godot, waiting for Ed Miliband to give them the sign that they could argue that. Is that why it's been 6 months since Nicola Sturgeon pledged to repeal the bedroom tax in an independent Scotland? It is absolutely extraordinary to argue, as Joanne Lamont does and Jackie Baillie does, not that we couldn't control social security in Scotland, but that we shouldn't control social security in Scotland. And that's why the majority of the Scottish people see the route forward in social security so that we can banish the bedroom tax from Scotland and banish the iniquities being foisted on people with disability, to take the power in this country to have a social security system that meets the aspirations and fairness of the Scottish people.
Question number 2, Ruth Davidson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister when he'll next meet the Secretary of State for Scotland.
First Minister.
No plans near future.
Ruth Davidson.
Thank you. On Tuesday, Nicola Sturgeon stood in the chamber and, when talking about pensions, said, "Those who try to perpetuate the myth that Scotland's population is somehow uniquely ageing or ageing faster than that of the rest of the UK are simply wrong." However, the National Records of Scotland says the age structure, and I quote, "the age structure of Scotland's population means that it is projected to age more rapidly compared to the UK." So his deputy says Scotland is ageing more slowly, while his own government agency says the exact opposite. First Minister, which one is correct?
First Minister.
I actually heard the exchange between Gavin Brown and Nicola Sturgeon earlier on, so I have the exact detail on this. The dependency ratio in Scotland is currently below that of the UK, with an estimated 589 dependents per 1,000 people of working age in 2013, compared to 615 dependents in the UK as a whole. From around 2026, the gap between the Scottish and UK dependency ratios is projected to decrease. That is exactly the population projections and the same data source cited by the National Records of Scotland and the Scottish Parliament in the 210 base forecast. We now, of course, have the 2011 census. The paper sets out the dependency ratio, which is internationally accepted standard measure of population pressures, showing the ratio of dependents to those of working age. Far from ignoring the National Records Office, we used NRS projections, involved NRS staff in drafting this section of the report. And I hope that detail satisfies Ruth Davidson, as indeed it should have satisfied Gavin Brown 2 days ago.
Ruth Davidson.
Well, the First Minister is absolutely correct. The Scottish Government, in its paper on Monday, did use some of the projections of the National Records of Scotland. They used the projections that showed that the amount of pensioners between 2010 and 2035 for Scotland would increase by 26%, while in the rest of the UK it would increase by 28%. But what they didn't include was the fact that the number of people of working age in the rest of the UK would increase by 16%, and the working age population of Scotland would increase by just 7% over the same period. And this matters because Monday's pensions paper said that under independence, Scots could retire earlier and on more money because Scotland's population was ageing at a different rate to the rest of the UK. Now, the National Records of Scotland show that 7% to 26% is 3.71 pensioners for every worker, more than twice the rate of the rest of the UK. Now, the First Minister talked there about dependents. And this was another pockling of the figures on Monday, because the figures that they used when talking about pensions, and it would be worthwhile the backbenchers listening to this, the figures that they used compared the ratio of workers to the ratio of pensioners and children. But as everyone knows, when you're dealing with pensions, it's the ratio of workers to pensioners that counts. So all of Monday's promises, such as they are based on the SNP convincing people that Scotland's demographic time bomb isn't the same as other countries. And it's just not true. First Minister, the government knew this all along because your own agency told them. You've pocketed the figures. Isn't it the case the SNP's pension policy just doesn't add up?
First Minister.
I'm not certain Ruth Davidson's fully in command of this subject. Can I say three things for Ruth Davison? One, the dependency ratio, that is the number of under-16s and over pensionable age compared per 1,000 people of working age. That's what the dependency ratio is. Secondly, the review of the increase in terms of when the pension is paid in the pensions paper is based on another matter. That's based on life expectancy. Age 65 is 1.2 years higher in the UK than Scotland for women and 1.3 years higher for men. Now, we obviously want to do something about life expectancy, but it's not fair to ignore that reality in terms of deciding what the appropriate pension age is. And we doubt very much if the UK government, in increasing the pension age, took into account these life expectancy figures in Scotland. So in fairness, and welcomed by a range of experts, that is a reasonable thing to propose, to have a pensionable age which is appropriate to Scottish conditions. But thirdly, I'm fascinated by this, given the Tory track record, this fairly blatant scaremongering on pensions. And therefore I was interested in a letter that one of my constituents in Aberdeenshire sent to the Pension Service, that's Department of Working's Pension Service. This is the reply that was received. In reply to your letter regarding your state pension if Scotland votes for independence, if Scotland does become independent, this will have no effect on your state pension. You will continue to receive it just as you do at present. Now, given that the Pensions Service, the agency of the UK Government, is sending to my constituents in Aberdeenshire such definitive information, it ill behoves Labour or Tory scaremongers to come to this chamber with a scaremongering agenda. This is the letter from the Department of Work and Pensions. Presumably Ruth Davison welcomes that reassurance.
A supplementary, Alice McInnes.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Today, the Scottish Fire Service Board is voting on the closure of 6 of the 8 emergency control rooms in Scotland, and people across Scotland, including in my North East constituency, where the control room in Aberdeen is under threat, will be deeply concerned. Local knowledge of our communities and the geography of each area is vital to ensuring the right rapid response is dispatched to each emergency. There is a very real risk that having only 2 control centres in Dundee and Johnston will mean the loss of that crucial local knowledge, increasing risks to lives. The Scottish Government has taken away all local decision-making on this, so will the First Minister step in to halt this irrational and dangerous move?
First Minister.
Well, that is not a reasonable presentation of what the Fire Services Board are doing. As they've pointed out, the changes in terms of the single fire services are very decentralised in terms of the impact they'll have and people's assurance that firefighters will be able to attend local conditions in the most effective and efficient way. But, you know, I think any Liberal Democrat should have a care in talking about the fire service at the present moment. Presumably the people who care most about the fire service are firefighters and the people in the service itself. Can I just, as gently as I possibly can, remind a member that in England and Wales, under the control of the Tories and Liberal Democrats, firefighters are on strike at the present moment, just as the Scottish Government and the FBU are trying to find a settlement which will avoid that strike in Scotland. So any Liberal Democrat coming to this chamber weeping crocodile tears for the fire service should look at the total disarray south of the border.
Question number 3, Will Rennie.
To ask the First Minister what issues will be discussed at the next meeting of the Cabinet.
First Minister.
Issues of importance to the people of Scotland.
On Monday I met John Young from Patna in Ayrshire to see for myself the devastation left by Scottish coal at the Dunstan Hill open cast. The financial shortfall to restore the mines in East Ayrshire alone has risen to an estimated £130 million, and it could be higher as there is a real doubt that all the restoration bonds can be recovered. Despite the growing restoration bill, the Council has now given permission to mine for for coal at 2 sites without any bonds or financial guarantees. Hargreaves Mining Company won't pick up the cost of restoring these mines if they fail again. John Young is angry that his community has been ripped off by these mining companies and let down by his council and his government. Will the First Minister step in and stop this reckless behaviour?
Before the First Minister does, can I say that last week at the beginning of the debate on Opencast, I reminded members that there is a live case before the Court of Session on restoration, and therefore members should take care to avoid mentioning the details of that particular case. First Minister.
Well, in terms of your guidance, Presiding Officer, I think in fairness, Willie Rennie should look at the efforts that are being made by Fergus Ewing and by the councils, not just in Ayrshire but elsewhere in Scotland, in terms to come to an effective settlement which both restores what can be restored, protects the environment for the future, builds a better system, and of course the thing he didn't mention, preserves vital employment in an important industry. And I don't think any reasonable person, given the efforts that the Minister has made in conjunction with the local councils across Scotland, of different political persuasions incidentally, could come to a reasonable conclusion other than the Minister is acting in the best interests and balancing the interests of peoples in the communities of Scotland.
Question number 4, Stuart Stephen. Sorry. Willie Rennie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. But there are signs that the industry could fail again. The world coal price remains low and the insurance bond market is closed. Yet the Scottish Government seem to be incapable of reading those signs. Not only is the Government supporting mining without financial guarantees, the very problem that we got into this in the first place, but I've now discovered that their own agency, Scottish Enterprise, is proposing to give taxpayers' money to Hargreaves Mining Company, public funds for an industry that has already ripped us off. Surely it's time to call a halt to this environmental injustice and economic madness. Will the First Minister act now or sit idle whilst the companies rip us and our environment off again?
First Minister.
Well, I don't think that's at all a reasonable way to portray the efforts of the Energy Minister. And as in his first question, at no stage in either question did Willie Rennie express the slightest sympathy or endorsement or solidarity with the workers in that industry. And I have to say, an argument that comes at this important issue and doesn't balance the council and the community's concerns and the environmental concerns and employment in places like Ayrshire and Fife is an approach which I don't think can command a reasonable perspective. And I look forward to the day that Willie Rennie will go and look in the eye the workers that he's proposing should not have jobs and tell them exactly what the Liberal Democrat policy is.
Question number 4, Stuart Stevenson.
To ask the First Minister whether the Prime Minister has responded to his letter calling for a moratorium on the privatisation of Royal Mail.
First Minister.
Well, I'm disappointed to say I've not heard from the Prime Minister as yet. But it is absolutely clear the people of Scotland resoundingly don't want this misguided privatisation and should confirm the moratorium as soon as possible.
Stuart Stevenson.
Surprising, First Minister. Yesterday, Labour Party members at a conference in Brighton overwhelmingly backed a resolution calling for the renationalisation of the Royal Mail should the sell-off go ahead. Will the First Minister urge Mr Miliband to now back the position of the Scottish Government by publicly endorsing the views of his party, which could render the privatisation of Royal Mail infeasible?
First Minister.
It's true I haven't had a response from the Prime Minister, but I seem to have got a response from the Labour Party conference, so that's all to the good. And I suspect now, after 6 months, that the Labour Party have followed the SNP policy of repeal of the bedroom tax. We should welcome the fact that the Labour conference has now endorsed our call for taking the Royal Mail back into public hands. Now, I'm told here that this resolution was passed overwhelmingly. I even hear it might have been passed unanimously, which means that the Scottish delegates, Joanne Lamont, at the conference presumably voted for the renationalisation of the Royal Mail. Well, I know what you're pointing at. I mean, I'm just saying that if it was passed nearly unanimously, I'm assuming that Joanne Lamont was there speaking for the majority wishes of the unions and Labour Party members, which makes it all the more strange the attacks I've had from MSPs following First Minister's questions last week. So what is it? Is it the response to public ownership that we saw so resoundingly from the Labour conference, or was it the back-calling of the SNP that we saw from Labour MSPs last week?
Question number 5, Neil Findlay.
To ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government has taken to improve the quality of residential care for older people.
First Minister.
Well, the Government is committed to ensuring the highest possible standards in the residential care sector. We require the care inspector to inspect every care home in Scotland, unannounced, at least once every year. Additional inspections are carried out on these services which are at greatest risk, which means that these services are inspected now several times a year to ensure the required improvements are being made.
Neil Findlay.
The Pentland Hill Care Home in Edinburgh has had a series of poor inspection reports, the most recent one truly appalling, and there is now a police investigation into 4 deaths. Does the First Minister agree there is something seriously wrong with an inspection regime that has repeatedly identified problems in key areas, but little or nothing appears to have been improved?
First Minister.
I can't comment on an ongoing police investigation, and there are strict rules on that. What I can say, let's take the general issue, that most people would accept and agree that the new inspection regime for homes is a substantial improvement. I see Jackie Bailey in her place. She'll remember that she welcomed it comprehensively on the 15th of September 2011 in Parliament. It's a huge and substantial better regime than that which it replaced. And of course, the importance in terms of the unannounced inspections and the follow-up inspections is that whether we're dealing with issues in the health service or issues in care home, the absolute priority is to have an inspection regime which brings these matters to light. The real difficulties, as we've seen tragically elsewhere, in a health service or in care homes, is when over a prolonged period of time, safety issues are left unaddressed. Now, it is the whole purpose of the inspection regime to identify these problems, and I'm sure that the various investigations, including the police investigation, will be carried through without fear or favour and do whatever else is required. I also should say that Alec Neil has asked BUPA directors to meet with him later today to discuss in more detail what urgent steps they have been taking to improve the quality of residential care across all of their Scottish homes.
Question number 6, Liz Smith.
To ask the First Minister what recent discussions the Scottish Government has had with the providers of mobile phone services to improve coverage in the rural areas.
First Minister.
Well, we're committed to improving mobile coverage across rural Scotland. We're working collaboratively with 4 mobile operators to address issues around coverage and performance at both ministerial and official level. The Deputy First Minister met with 3 on 20th of May. The Minister for Local Government and Planning met with EE on 17th September. We acknowledge that mobile coverage in rural areas is substandard. The Ofgem data, of course, said that 3G population is 96.6% and 91% in rural areas. But I'm sure Liz Smith welcomed the Scottish Government's evaluation of that data and republication, because we suspected that Ofgem data wasn't giving the complete picture, as would be our experience in rural areas.
Liz Smith.
Could I thank the First Minister for that? Obviously, the Scottish Government's report has made it very clear that in something like 60% of Perth and Kinross and 53% in Stirlingshire, there is no 3G coverage, and obviously that has an impact on individuals and businesses, and if somebody obviously has to contact emergency services. Could I ask specifically what discussions the Scottish Government is having with local authorities to bring forward plans to use the £150 million of investments available from the UK Government to help this process?
First Minister.
Well, I think Liz Smith will agree that the first step, because of the previous Ofgem stats being the only ones available, were the welcome mobile performance and coverage report on the 16th of September, which has just been published, to address that and try and explain why we didn't feel that the Ofgem figures were carrying forward the true picture in much of rural Scotland. And of course, I'm sure that Liz Smith also welcomes the fact that we've already engaged with the mobile operators. There will certainly be engagement with local authorities in terms of rolling out the substantial and very ambitious improvement plan. And I do welcome the fact that Liz Smith has come with a question addressing mobile coverage and hasn't made the blunder of her Better Together colleagues in suggesting that somehow mobile charges would be higher in an independent Scotland. I think we can say safely that that particular piece of project fear has been thoroughly debunked.
Kenneth Gibson.
Presiding Officer, this is an important issue for my Arran constituents. The NHS Emergency Medical Retrieval Service, which transfers critically ill patients from remote and rural areas, relies on mobile phones to operate and has expressed concern at the lack of coverage. And you'll know that for years UK ministers have failed to remedy this situation, although Minister Ed Vaizey did say it would be rolled out by 2015. There is no indication as to when it will happen in the lead up to that date, despite the fact that the EMRS has said that mobile phone coverage for Arran is the most #1 priority for Scotland. Does the First Minister agree the UK Government should redouble its efforts to deliver mobile coverage, and will he press them to do so?
First Minister.
Well, we have been working with the Department of Culture, Media and Sport to ensure that the mobile infrastructure project has maximum impact. For example, we've recently helped facilitate discussions between the supplier Arqiva and Scottish local authorities. Of course, as has been said, have a crucial role to play in the project, given the role in local planning decisions. The Deputy First Minister will seek clarification for DCBMS on the member's behalf about the expected impact of the initiative on Arran, because, as he rightly says, there are particular issues which give the matter even more importance than it has in the many other rural areas of Scotland.
That ends First Minister's questions. We now move to members' business. I'll allow a short pause to allow members who are not participating in the debate to leave and for the public gallery to clear before we move on to the business in hand.